Welcome to News9 Mediaverse, and you are watching On Point with me. And in today's edition on Point, we will talk about the imminent invasion of Gaza. I'm talking about the ground assault which Israelis are preparing. Gaza operation is moving into a critical phase. Israel has given an ultimatum to the citizens of North Gaza. It would be the biggest displacement of people in Israel in the last 50 years. I would say after 1948, Nakba, a word in Arabic, disaster. But it is going to be both complicated and costly. And as we speak and report the events in Gaza, there are also stories that are coming out that some hostages have died. Hamas claims that the hostages have died because of bombing, but that's a different story we will not get into. But today, we will talk about why North Gaza. And joining me on the show are my colleagues and eminent guests from Israel. In the studio will be Aditya Rajkol, Executive Editor, News9 Plus. And joining me are Joseph Rosen of the Institute for National Security from Jerusalem, Anat Bernstein, who is President of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce, and Mikhail Mayan, who is an Israeli diplomat at the United Nations, live from New York. Thank you all of you for joining me. But before we start the discussion, why North Gaza? Let me take you through the details of the story, the first part of it. So if I have to describe what's happening on the ground, how Israel is preparing, then the start of the story is that Israel is preparing to annex the northern part of Gaza. That's the first part of it. Then, to account for the sort of action which has taken place, it's intense. 6,000 bombs have been dropped, so it's an intensive air campaign that has taken place. The blows are being softened. 24-hour ultimatum to Gazans have been given. You know, Gazans have been asked to go to the south. 10 lakh people will be displaced. That's a rough estimate. And these people have been asked to cross Gazi-Wada. Now, that's the southern part of Gaza. Earlier operations have taken place in 2009, 2014, but that's a different story. But the sad part is that the Hamas wants to use people as cannon fodder. So they want them to stay there. I would say that invasion will cut Gaza into two parts. There are strategic objectives which the Israel will have to explain. Then, I would say that this operation is going to be very, very critical to meet the strategic objectives. Aditya, before I introduce my guests, I want you to explain it to our viewers, why North Gaza?
Well, obviously the main reason remains that these are the places where hideouts of Hamas currently are. You went through the statement that the Israeli Defense Forces has come out with. It clearly mentions the areas where the hideouts are, and these will be not only subject to airstrikes now, but a ground assault. And that's why the common public has been asked to move towards the southern areas. The UN is in touch with both Israel and people in Gaza as well. There are UN centers out there to create a safe passage towards southern Israel and also towards the Egyptian border. The Egypt has also put out a statement saying that it has requested Israel to not launch airstrikes at the border, Gaza-Egypt border, so that there could be a reconstruction of that border area and probably refugees can be taken in. So it is a humanitarian crisis. It's being said that there are 23 lakh people currently in Gaza, and as we have been discussing over the last few days, Kartikeya, the ground assault is imminent. There's been an emergency unity government in power. There's already a mobilization of 3,60,000 people from the troops, from the reserves of the IDF.
Okay.
And it's absolutely no diplomatic efforts are going to help right now.
Okay, let me play out the bite and then we go to the guests. Let's play the bite.
אחרי אירוע רצחני, אכזרי ומפתיע, הטבח של מחבלי חמאס הרצחניים, חיות האדם, בילדינו, נשותינו, אנשינו, הוא חייתי, הוא לא אנושי. צה"ל נלחם בטרוריסטים חסרי רחמים שביצעו מעשים שלא ניתן להעלות על הדעת בכל מקום שיש בו אנשים, בכל מקום שקיימת בו אנושות. על המתקפה המתועבת הזו החליט יחיא סינואר, הריבון ברצועת עזה, ולכן הוא וכל המערכת שתחתיו הם בני מוות. אנחנו נתקוף אותם, אנחנו נפרק אותם, נפרק את המערכת שלהם. צה"ל תחת פיקודי מבין את גודל השעה ואת גודל המשימה המוטלת על כתפינו. צה"ל אחראי לביטחון המדינה ואזרחיה, ובשבת בבוקר בעוטף עזה לא עמדנו בזה. אנחנו נלמד, נתחקר, אבל עכשיו זו עת למלחמה. בשעות הקשות האלה אני רוצה שתדעו, צה"ל כאן, כוח המגן של מדינת ישראל, בכל עוצמתו, יכולותיו, ובעיקר אנשיו הנפלאים. אני מאוד גאה לעמוד בראשם של מפקדים וחיילים הנכונים להילחם בחירוף נפש ובנחישות. ביניהם אלפים רבים של חיילים וחיילות במילואים שעזבו הכל ברגע אחד והגיעו כדי להילחם, כדי להגן על הבית. הייתי בשטח, ראיתי את הזוועות, ראיתי את התמונות, שוחחתי עם מפקדים ולוחמים שלחמו בשטח. לצד הזוועות של האויב מתגלים גם מעשי גבורה של האזרחים, החיילים ואנשי כוחות הביטחון וההצלה שלנו.
And now let me go to my guests straight away, Joseph Rosen, Anat Bernstein and Michal Mayan. Let me go across to Joseph first. Joseph, why northern Gaza? Why the Israeli state has decided to focus on the north and cut the Gaza Strip into two? What is the strategic objective they want to achieve?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. But I want, with your permission, to take this discussion to a broader, more strategic aspect and remind all of us that Hamas is only a proxy. And before, I agree that the only goal of Israel should be the utter destruction of Hamas. And probably the only way to do it is by entering Gaza with ground forces. But I would add that currently we have rare conditions that allow us to think of, and I would say even plan, a strategic surprise, not only against Hamas, but to the entire chain of command. And in that context, I will add also Iran. We were caught by surprise on the 7th of October, and
I think there's a bit of a problem. Anat, can you take that question? Why not Gaza? I think there's a bit of an audio problem, Joseph, but why not Gaza?
Why north? Look at the map. Look how Gaza looks. Gaza is a rectangle. To the west, you have the Mediterranean. North and east is Israeli villages, and south is Egypt. So you need to start in the place which is far from the part with the border with Egypt. That's why I guess, I'm not a defense expert, they start from the other side, which is the north, and which is the place where it's a very narrow strip. So I guess that they are starting there.
The same question to you, Michal. Why North Gaza? And how will Israel take care of so much of displacement? Reuters is reporting that 1.1, Michal, am I audible to you? 1.1 million Thank you for joining me. 1.1 million people will be displaced. How do you take care of such a huge displacement when you have given 24 hours? Hamas is not letting them leave their house. And then if they stay there, I think that's going to be a huge collateral.
So first of all, I want to thank you for having this discussion and for having us all here on your show. I want to start with the fact that this is a war, and this is a war that was brought upon my country, our country, by a murderous, brutal terrorist organization, which is Hamas. And I want to really put the focus on you mentioned that the plan is to annex the northern part of Gaza. I want to say something very clearly. We withdrew from Gaza in 2005, and we have no intention, and we did not want this war, and we did not want to go into this horrible battles that we have in front of us. But the brutal attack that cost the lives of more than 1,300 civilians and women and children and Holocaust survivors and elderly people requests us to have a strong response. And I want to add something else. Nobody wants to harm civilians. I think our notification and our call to evacuate the area is a clear sign of that. And the responsibility for the civilian population in Gaza lies in the hands of the Hamas terrorist organization that will pay a heavy price for harming our people.
But how do you take care of the civilians when Hamas is not letting them leave their residences? The Hamas wants to use them like cannon fodder there.
Well, again, Kartikeya, war is horrible, and there hasn't been any war in the history of of mankind where civilians weren't harmed. This is not our goal, but our goal is to destroy Hamas infrastructure, and they are deliberately using civilians as human shields. It has never been more clear than during this horrible time. And again, I want to stress this is not another escalation. It's not a military escalation. It's an all-out war. We will do whatever we can, but we will also do whatever we can to destroy Hamas, and that is our main goal, while maintaining the safety of over 100 people, civilians, they have taken as hostages.
I think that's a very important point, Mikhail, you have made, that it's not a military escalation. Any person who observes foreign policy or strategic affairs would know the difference between military escalation and war. I think the way you have articulated it clears the position as to why so much of bombardment is taking place in Gaza. But just to take our other viewers, give them a sense of what Gaza is, let me play out a second set of graphics for them. Those details to understand what what Gaza represents. Gaza right now is full of underground tunnels. What you see on top of Gaza is different from what is inside Gaza, what is beneath Gaza, how Hamas uses Gaza tunnels. In fact, there is a different word for it, and you'll be surprised to know when I'm talking about the underground Gaza tunnels, there's a word which they use, Gaza Metro. They use the word Gaza Metro. And the word is that the whole underground movement of people in Gaza is through these tunnels. Let's play the other part of this graphic. The tunnels are called underground metro, as I was saying. So let's move forward. When we say underground metro, that's how they move. But the army will have to face booby traps and snipers. When I use the word booby traps and snipers, I'm talking about the urban warfare that was witnessed in Aleppo, the urban warfare that was witnessed in Syria, the Al-Hamas. You know, the Hamas has Russian anti-tank Kornet missiles. That's another dimension. So imagine you're using these anti-tank missiles on infantry, because ground operations are about infantry. And Israel will suffer ground casualties, because if there is a war, there is a ground casualty. Let me play the third set of graphics, just to give an understanding of what Gaza is. Gaza is a 25-mile long enclave. It's a big enclave, number of cities are there. There's a North Gaza, there's South Gaza, the South Gaza, the airport has been bombed. Let's play the other part. It's enclosed by the sea, Israel and Egypt, as one of our panelists said. It's densely populated, 2.1 million residents. That is more than 20 lakh, 22 lakh. And it's a different it's a different geographical mix of people. There are very young people in Gaza. Gaza has high poverty level. Let's play other part. The majority population is under the age of 14 in Gaza. Under the age of 14. 81% of people are below poverty line, which means that there is no economic activity that is taking place. It also means that they are dependent on Israel. There is a massive water and electricity crisis because that has been stopped. As the guest said, it's not a military escalation, it's war. And the rules changes when it's war. And Israel also runs a naval and an air blockade on Gaza. So Gaza is not a usual territory. It's a different ball game altogether. And Wadi Gaza Reserve is the only coastal wetland in Gaza. Let me play out a bite in which one of the officers is explaining the war is being fought. So you get an idea how complex the situation is. And Wadi Gaza is crucial for agriculture. Let's play the bite.
Security fence do not approach the border, only go south. Again, out of a concern for safety of non-combatants. I'll continue to read. Hamas terrorists are hiding in Gaza City, inside tunnels, underneath houses, and inside buildings populated with innocent Gazan civilians. Civilians of Gaza City, evacuate south for your own safety and the safety of your families, and distance yourself from Hamas terrorists who are using you as human shields. And the last paragraph, in the following days, the IDF will continue to operate with significant force in Gaza City and will make extensive efforts to to avoid harming civilians. That's the message that we issued a few hours ago to Gazan civilians, and the aim here is to minimize the damage to civilians. There are significant combat operations ongoing, and we are preparing for future and the continuance of our combat operations, and out of an understanding that there are civilians here whom are not our enemy and we do not want to target them, we are asking them to evacuate so that we will be able to continue to strike military targets belonging to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That is the purpose, and I think that's an important update, relevant for you to be aware of. This is a first notice that we gave. We understand that this will take time. It's not an easy process, but we have issued this guidance, and the aim of the evacuation is simply to save lives. As you may have read in the media, this was communicated to UN authorities, first and foremost to UN authorities, and the IDF is in communications and liaison with UN authorities, transferring information to them and also listening to what the UN informs Israel about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And as I've said many times during the last 7 days, the IDF remains fully committed to the law of international conflict. We will carry ourselves accordingly, in sharp contrast to the enemies around us and to Hamas, which is in total disregard of anything related to values, norms, and definitely not the laws of armed conflict.
So it's very, very clear that the target is going to be the Gaza City, and the visuals you see behind me will show you the intensity of the aerial bombardment which is taking place in Gaza. As one of the guests very clearly pointed it out, I think that's a big takeaway. It's not a military escalation, it's war out there. That's how Israel is defining it, it's war. So in war there are casualties. So I think the rules and the norms have changed. And this is the intensity of bombardment, the softening which is taking place. Aditya, coming to you, I think one thing is very clear when the IDF spokesperson is speaking and when he's clearly stated that we are asking people to leave the Gaza City and that this is the sort of the bombardment which is taking place. I think, Aditya, it's going to be literally a hand-to-hand combat in Gaza City.
Absolutely. I have no doubts in my mind that it's going to be hand-to-hand combat. That's why 360,000 troops and reserves have been brought in. In fact, we heard Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, the international spokesperson, clearly indicate what's the plan of action is, and that's why they have given 24 hours for people in North Gaza to evacuate. In fact, I've just received another statement from the Israeli Defense Forces which says the current accusation made against the IDF regarding the use of white phosphorus in Gaza is unequivocally false. The IDF has not deployed the use of such munitions, and this is a propaganda by Hamas. We've seen a few videos and photographs unconfirmed.
Can you just explain the viewers what white ammunition is? What is a phosphorus bomb?
Well, there is a lot of propaganda that has happened during the Iraq war, particularly in Syria, about the use of chemical weapons, about the use of white phosphorus that actually cripples the civilian population out there. There have been claims that it has been widely used in Syria.
I think, just to tell our viewers, when we talk about phosphorus weapon, as Aditya was saying, basically it's a weapon which can burn through your skin. So it is not banned, but in its deployment, there are rules which are in existence. There are international norms. You're not supposed to use that in civilian areas. You can use it where military is. So it's a very potent weapon. The phosphorus bombs were used in Vietnam, and one of the kind of the phosphorus weapon which everyone remembers is the famous photograph of 1970s of a girl running away, and at the back when the napalm exploded. So it just burns through your skin. So this is the sort of bombing which is taking place in Gaza. This is the action which is taking place in Gaza, and I think the time is running out for Hamas. Coming back to you, Joseph, my question is Israel looking for a close combat like Aleppo and Mosul in Gaza? Is that we are going to witness? Something which the American Special Forces did, when they went against ISIS?
Well, in fact, we are fighting against ISIS because Hamas is ISIS, if not worse. We are ready to fight with all we have to achieve the goal of the utter destruction of Hamas. Regarding the phosphorus bombs, I also seen the video that Hamas published. Actually, it was a video taken during the war in Ukraine, a bomb used by Russia. And I would like to add another point, following what Michal said. The fact that we called civilians in Gaza to evacuate and Hamas calling them to stay at their homes is again a proof for their war crimes. Hamas war crimes, actually a double war crime because they not only target civilians, but they also use civilians as human shields. So I would add that Hamas is not only responsible for the safety and security of the Israeli hostages they kidnapped, but also responsible for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Anat, United Nations is asking for more time. Do you think that the state of Israel will ask or will give United Nations more time to shift its entire machinery out of there, because United Nations is saying that's really impossible for them to do it in 24 hours. That's also a first.
I'll tell you what I would answer. Release the kids, release the elderly, and then we can talk about extension. But we have over 150 hostages, 6 months baby, 9 months baby, a dimension, a lady, 85. So if you want to have some leeway, release the hostages, especially the kids and the elderly. That's one. And when you're talking about ultimatum, let me remind you that Hamas knows that we will go into a ground operation from, not just from Saturday when they started, but when they started to plan this attack. So it's not 24 hours. Let's be clear about it. It's at least 1 year that they know that this day will come. And if they really want to protect their country and people, they had enough time. As they plan to attack us, they could plan to take care of their people, but that's not their interest. They're not their priority. They don't care about their people. And I do want to mention Golda Meir. We're talking about her a lot those days, mentioning 50 years to Yom Kippur, to 73 war. She said that peace will come to the Middle East when the Arabs, and here I would say when Hamas love his children more than he hates us. And this is exactly what's happening now. Hamas don't care about Palestine. They don't care about their people. They hate Israel. They hate Jews. They are driven by fundamentalism and they have to take care of their people. I mean, we have to protect ourselves. Golda Meir said something wonderful, saying we have a secret sauce. And the secret sauce is that we don't have anywhere else to go. We don't have an option. We need to protect ourselves. Hamas attacked us. We need to make sure that the villages and the entire Israel is secure. And that's what we're going to do now.
You know, Anat, during insurgencies, Islamic militancies, people use a very stereotype: leave the children and women alone. But if you look at the evolution of Islamic militancy or the Islamic terrorism, children and women are first to be radicalized. If you look at the way Muslim Brotherhood Hamas has been inspired by Muslim Brotherhood. If the way Muslim Brotherhood has evolved, or the way even in Kashmir the kids were brainwashed in using stones against security forces who were just doing their duty, you know, standing guard. Even in the case of Gaza, this sort of radicalization has happened. So how do you deal with that? You know, you have men who are fighters, who are part of the Hamas infrastructure, but then you have non-fighters, Anat, but they're equally radicalized, as you rightly pointed out, the Golda Meir's statement, the hatred is there. How do you counter that? Because it's like Franz Fanon, it's like an eternal cycle. It just goes on and on and on, like a circle.
The circle can be broken. I mean, I don't agree with you that we can put the blame on the Islam. We have great Muslims audience, and this is not the issue. This is a terror organization. Let's separate it. This terror organization, which eventually will reach Africa and will reach India. I mean, it's not a Palestinian problem. It's
like India is a victim of Islamic terrorism. I mean, so there's no doubt about it. Look at Kashmir. Okay. India is a victim. India understands what is how religions can be misinterpreted and how youth can be radicalized. Who knows better than us?
Right. That's why India has to continue support us and understand that when we're fighting Hamas, we're fighting ISIS. This is the situation now. And Austin Lloyd from the US is now in Israel, and he knows ISIS very well. And when he spoke a few minutes back, he said, what I saw, what Hamas is doing, what Hamas was doing is even worse than ISIS. So we, the entire democratic liberal nations, have to fight it. There is a price. I'm not saying that, and as Michal said, we are entering a war. And as much as we want to protect the people, this is war situation.
Michal, you know, coming to you, the physical infrastructure is being destroyed. There is no accounting of the fact that how many people are being hit. My question to you is, Michal, how do you deal with the people who are radicalized? Because ultimately you have children, men, women there who are radicalized. So when you take over, I would say, the administration of Gaza, what do you do? Aditya, you know, I'll go to Michal later. What do you do? How do you de-radicalize them? Because, you know, even if you take over the entire Gaza, flush out the entire infrastructure of terrorism, how do you deal with those who are left? Because people will be there.
I think it's next to impossible. At least in the short term, it's next to impossible. It's you know, unimaginable. I mean, we have dealt with it, as you rightly pointed out, in Kashmir, and we have not just seen Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, but we have seen local radicalization that not only happens in Jamaat-e-Islami mosques in South Kashmir, but happens door to door in villages. Unfortunately, people have seen gun while they have grown up last 30 years or 35 years in Kashmir. And even though now the terror graph has reduced in the Kashmir Valley, the radicalization unfortunately continues. So it is difficult to deal with it, you know, militarily, politically, and otherwise. And here as well, of course, you launch a military assault, you launch a ground assault, and you have the airstrikes that are happening, and ultimately you flush out Hamas and their, you know, terror tunnels, the terror metro, and other hideouts. But what will you do to the population? In West Bank as well, you've been witnessing violence. You've been seeing stabbing attacks. You've been witnessing lone wolf attacks. I mean, today, not just in China, in Beijing, where an Israeli diplomat, a staffer of the Israeli embassy was stabbed. Similar situation in France, where a teacher has been stabbed today. So these lone wolf attacks, this radicalization unfortunately cannot be stopped, at least in the short term. Perhaps in the long term there could be some methodology in place, but governing Gaza I think would be a nightmare, would be a Herculean task.
So it brings us to two issues. One you have raised, which I would have. Isn't it disconcerting, Michal, the way Israeli diplomats have been physically attacked across the world?
Thank you, Kartikeya. I'm sorry I lost connection there. I hope you can hear me now.
No issue. Isn't that very disturbing that diplomats are being attacked?
It is. It's very disturbing. And I would add that it's not just disturbing for Israeli diplomats. It is very disturbing for Jewish communities around the world. And if I may return to your question about what are we doing about this radical indoctrination of hate, which I absolutely agree with you, and is really the biggest tragedy here, because and it's also one of the reasons that we are now responding forcefully to this horrendous attack against us. This is like Joseph said at the beginning, this is not just against the terrorist organization Hamas. The world is watching. Hezbollah is watching. The Islamic Republic of Iran, who is funding and promoting this violence, is also watching. And the world is watching to see what happens to Israel. So again, I also want to connect to what Anat said. This is not just about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. This is Israel standing in the forefront against extreme radicalism in order to promote and preserve morality and democracy. This is what we were calling on all nations, and we appreciate India's stance on this in a clear condemnation of this terror attack. Unfortunately, Indians know very well that following the 26th of November events, what it means to be attacked by terrorists in your homes, in your living areas. The atrocities are unbelievable. And what's happening now is we see across the world demonstrations of people supporting Hamas, not realizing that Hamas has done absolutely nothing for the Palestinian cause, that he's cynically and cowardly, I would add, using civilians in order to protect against our military. Like Anat said, release the hostages right now and come out and come out of the civilian population. It's really unbelievable, and I agree that it's going to be a long and painful process. It's not a short-time war because we want a long-time solution. And right now we are focused on this war, on protecting our civilians, and are sending a very clear message to the world. If you harm us, you will pay a price.
Is it possible to force a nation to have a talk under the pressure of a gun? That's what Hamas was thinking. Do you think it's possible that any nation would just give in just because a terrorist organization has done a big attack? Do you think that that's where the Hamas miscalculated, the Israeli resolve?
Absolutely. I think they were trying to use a turbulent time where we had our differences, to be honest, where we were focusing really on the political situation. I think they caught us by surprise, and I think they're also now being surprised by the unity that is being caused by this. This is a united front. People are flying in from all over the world. I know this because I know that even from the US, but all over the world, people are flying in order to support the cause, to support our communities, to support the war. Unfortunately, the Jewish people and the state of Israel have known dark times. This is, on a personal level, a very dark time for us. But we will grow stronger out of this, and we will defeat Hamas. We didn't want this war. We absolutely don't want to harm civilians. We don't want to see Palestinians or Israeli civilians die, but we will finish it on our terms, and we will eradicate
So,
Hamas.
is it correct on my part to say that Hamas, instead of doing service, no pun intended, to the Palestinian cause, has ended up doing the biggest disservice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would add, billions of dollars have been going into Gaza over the years for infrastructure, for electricity, for water. And Hamas has been using it in order to cause more damage, more destruction, and more death. And they're not even hiding it anymore. As was mentioned before, we called civilians to evacuate. Hamas is actually demanding them to stay. And it's a very tragic, horrible situation. But like I said, we are very determined to send a clear message to Hamas, Hezbollah, all terrorist organizations around the world. It won't work. We will defend ourselves and we will lose.
Mikhail, my colleague Aditya has a question for you.
Mikhail, thank you very much for joining us live from New York. We've been hearing you at the United Nations as well. My question to you is about the global support for Israel or how the Arab street would really react to this, because we've seen statements coming in from Saudi, from Qatar, and this is also a time over the last many weeks when we were thinking and expecting normalization of ties between Saudi and Israel. Do you think that it would be increasingly different for the Arab street to defend the kind of terror attack that happened right now? And how are they really going to take this forward? Because I personally believe that this is the biggest setback to the so-called Palestinian cause right now. But how do you feel the Arab street should calculate their actions in the coming days and weeks?
Well, first I want to say that it is my opinion that this is also carefully chosen timing. We want to live in peace in the Middle East, and we've been promoting peace and normalization with our countries in the Middle East. And Saudis were a big part of that. I think that was a big threat to terror organizations. I think that was a big threat to terror countries like Iran. And I think absolutely there are many, like Anat said, moderate voices in Islamic countries, in Arab countries, who are looking at these horrible images and are shocked as equally as you are and as I am. And they, I think that's why we are also focusing on a clear condemnation and a realization that this is not what they stand for. I think I can see online, there are major campaigns, disinformation, like we mentioned previously, with what the IDF is using, but also disinformation about the support and people supporting, maybe not understanding what they're supporting. But I am also seeing a lot of messages, brave, I have to say, messages from Arab leaders condemning these horrible acts, telling the world this is not what Palestinians stand for. And we see a clear distinction between Palestinians and terror organization Hamas. And we see that, and we are fighting Hamas. We are not fighting the Palestinians.
Miguel, you brought in a very important perspective on disinformation. That has become a global challenge. We saw what happened during the Russia-Ukraine war as well. And this time again, over the last 6 days, we've witnessed a barrage of disinformation over the internet, almost like an intellectual and a political support to the Hamas terrorists for killing civilians. I'll quote an example. 3 days ago, I tweeted because my friend Avishai from Israel told me about a brutal story about a pregnant woman, who was killed. Her stomach was dissected. The child was, out, and both of them were killed, shot in the head. Merciless killing, brutal killing. And then there are these intellectuals from Harvard to Stanford to other places who asked me for evidence and photographs, and I couldn't have tweeted that. And, they almost wanted my Twitter account to be banned. Thankfully, 2 days later, the Israeli media spoke to the eyewitnesses who told them the same story. And then the Iranian press, Iranian agency, put out my tweet saying that I am a, Israeli army officer and my stories have been debunked. This is the kind of fake news and disinformation that happens. So, do you also deal with this kind of disinformation on a daily basis, and how do you deal with this kind of a fake narrative?
I'll just add one more thing, Mikhail. I'll add one more thing. I know what Aditya is talking about. I think this is the case. The larger issue is the inability and the failure of the global press to believe the atrocity or the barbarism demonstrated by Hamas terrorists, number one. Secondly, that the Jews are at the receiving end right now and were attacked by terrorists from Gaza. And third, even if I say that the Israel did not go ahead and show sincerity for real resolution of the Palestine issue, it does not give any country, organization legitimate right to kill people and do things and atrocities they commit, which Aditya just described.
Yeah, I think I can relate to everything you said. I have to be very honest. I myself can't believe what I am witnessing on social media. And I think it's unbelievable to me, first, that people will do what they have done. And this is, I want to be very clear. The horror stories, they are horror stories. It is a nightmare. It seems like the gates of hell have been opened on us, but they are absolutely correct. That's the first thing. People did these things. Secondly, they took videos of these things and they celebrated it online. And this is why we call for a clear condemnation. This is why when I speak at the UN, I call on Iranians and Syrians to condemn this, because there is no justification to the horrors that we have witnessed online. Absolutely no justification. I'm not talking about any other aspect. People should not do these things to other people. And regarding the disinformation, I think I would like to call on your viewers to join, because again, like I mentioned, this is our war. We are fighting it, but we shouldn't fight it alone. And that means spreading the news, sharing what happened, calling on people to condemn this, realizing that this is our fight against extreme jihadism, extreme ISIS-like tactics, and joining it and sharing the real information and not the fake one.
Joseph, a quick question from you. Do you feel that, a sort of concentration of activity which is going to take place at Gaza can make Israel vulnerable in the northern borders? Is that a possibility which Israelis are accounting for? The Lebanon border, the Syrian border?
Well, as I said before, there is a chance for another front in the north, but in reality, so far, Hezbollah decided not to join the attacks by Hamas. So I truly believe that we have very good conditions to move from being surprised to plan a surprise, a strategic surprise against our enemies. And as I said before, we shouldn't focus only on the proxies and not only on Gaza. Some of the heads and leadership of Hamas is hidden outside of Gaza. And like we did with the Nazi Eichmann, we should do the same with the heads of Hamas, and our long arm should get them wherever they are hiding.
Anat, quickly, do you think that this is going to be a long operation? It's a long haul? This time it's going to be a long haul?
I mean, we say as much as it's needed. I mean, enough is enough. We compare the last week to the Holocaust. And after the Holocaust, we said never again. And after the October 7th incident, which is just like your 26/11, we say never again. So in order for this to be never again, we will do whatever it takes to make an end for that. And let me just share with you something, that I'm sitting now in my safe room in the south of Israel. And while my colleagues were talking, there was a missile attack here. You didn't hear it, the sirens, but my family member entered the room, sat quiet here next to me. And when the siren was over, they went out. So the attacks, the rockets continue also on Israel. And people need to remember that we are under constant attack. We are resilient, we are used to it, but please be aware that the Hamas is not in the tunnels all the time. They are continuing shooting Israel. Their aim is very clear, to destroy us. And of course, I want to be here to talk to you in 10 years, in 20 years. I don't have a choice.
Anat, stay safe. Stay safe. That's all I'll say today. And I would like to thank Joseph, Anat, and Michal for joining me. But you see, the bottom line is that ultimately when terror has to be dealt, Sometimes the strategies work, sometimes the strategies fail, sometimes the action on terror leads to further radicalization. And I'll give you an example. I hope it's a different story in Gaza. When the Americans went against Saddam Hussein, de-Baathification of the entire Iraq took place. But what happened was the people who were part of the Ba'ath Party got so radicalized because they were out of the system that they constituted the backbone of the ISIS, which haunts people even today. So I hope, in all sincerity, and even my colleague Aditya, that whatever happens, the action in Gaza leads to elimination of Hamas and not radicalization of a section that survives, which becomes even more vicious, more powerful than Hamas.
इंजीनियरिंग कर रहे हैं जो कि सभी लोग कर रहे हैं
Coaching is now starting from grade 3, 4, 5, 6.
कोटा जाने वाली बीच राह में आधे टेस्ट देके हैं सिलेक्शन की चाह में
ऑल इंडिया का बच्चा कोटा जाता है
This rat race is for rats, not for humans. So why should we even be a part of it?
The Rat Race. This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
उन्होंने मुझे बताया था कि आप चिंता मत करो, मैं आपको भरोसा दिलाता हूँ। फिर ये मेरा परिवार सब खत्म हो गया।
In a disturbing discovery on the Minnesota-Canada border, police found the bodies of 4 family members who they say froze to death.
Sent shockwaves across 2 continents and left many people asking a simple question: why?
प्रवीण भाई ने मुझे बताया था कि मैं घूमने के लिए, मेरा वीज़ा आया है कनाडा का, तो मैं घूमने के लिए जा रहा हूँ। फिर बाद में जो उन्होंने मुझे बताया कि मेरी निकुल से बात हुई है और वो मुझे यहाँ से अमेरिका क्रॉसिंग करवाना का बोल रहा था। तो 2-3 दिन बाद प्रवीण भाई का फ़ोन आया और वो बोले कि यहाँ पे जो सचिन है उनका